The crash didn't destroy Ethan Calloway's life. His wife did. While he lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, she vanished, took everything, and filed for divorce. But when he finally started fighting back with the help of a caregiver who refused to let him quit, his ex-wife returned, not to reconcile, but to take legal control of his entire existence. What followed was a brutal courtroom war that would either bury him forever or give him the strength to stand again. If you want to see how far Ethan's fight takes him, stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and failure. Ethan Calloway lay flat on his back, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the small brown water stains because it was easier than thinking about the fact that his legs wouldn't move. 3 weeks since the crash. 21 days since some drunk driver had T-boned his car at an intersection and sent his entire life spinning into the guardrail. The surgeons had saved his life. They kept reminding him of that, like he should be grateful. But they couldn't save his spine. "Mr. Calloway, can you feel this?" The physical therapist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a clipboard, pressed something against his calf. Ethan didn't look down. He already knew the answer. "No." She made a note. "And here?" "No?" Another note. She moved up his leg, repeating the question, and every time Ethan said no, she wrote something down like she was documenting the slow death of his former self. "We'll keep monitoring," she said gently. "Spinal injuries can be unpredictable. Sometimes sensation returns gradually." Ethan didn't respond. He'd heard the same careful optimism from every doctor, every nurse, every specialist who rotated through his room. They all said the same thing, maybe. Maybe he'd walk again. Maybe the swelling would go down. Maybe the damage wasn't permanent. But nobody looked him in the eye when they said it. After she left, Ethan turned his head toward the window. The world outside kept moving. Cars in the parking lot. People walking to their own lives. Somebody laughing in the hallway. Everything continued like nothing had changed, except for him. His phone buzzed on the side table. He reached for it, his arms still functional, still strong. At least he had that much. The screen lit up with a text from his business partner, Marcus. "We need to talk about the Henderson deal. Call me when you can." Ethan deleted it without responding. He'd been ignoring Marcus for days now, along with everyone else who wanted to discuss the company, the contracts, the meetings he was missing. Calloway Logistics had been his entire world before the accident. He'd built it from nothing, turned it into a multi-million-dollar operation, worked 70-hour weeks to make it succeed. Now the thought of it made him sick. Another buzz. This time it was his older brother, Bradley. "Checked in with your team today. Don't worry about anything. I've got it handled." Ethan's jaw tightened. Bradley had been handling things a lot lately, showing up at the office, talking to clients, making decisions. All under the guise of helping, of course, just keeping things running while Ethan recovered. But Ethan knew his brother well enough to recognize ambition dressed up as concern. He was about to put the phone down when he noticed the notification he'd been avoiding for the past 2 days. A voicemail from Savannah, his wife. Or technically, still his wife, though he hadn't seen her since the accident. She'd visited once in the ICU, stood by his bed for maybe 10 minutes, then left and never came back. No calls. No texts. Just silence. Ethan's finger hovered over the play button, then he locked the screen and dropped the phone on the blanket. He couldn't do it. Not today. The door opened again, and this time it was a nurse he didn't recognize. She was younger than the others, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, and an expression that didn't look particularly sympathetic. "Ethan Calloway. That's me. I'm Claire Whitaker. I'll be your primary caregiver starting today." She moved into the room without waiting for a response, set down a bag near the chair, and pulled out a tablet. Her movements were efficient, almost brisk, like she had a dozen other places to be. "Where's Angela?" Ethan asked. Angela had been his daytime nurse since he transferred out of ICU. "Reassigned. You've got me now." Claire didn't look up from the tablet as she spoke. She tapped through a few screens, scanned something, then finally glanced at him. Her eyes were sharp, direct, the kind of look that didn't offer any comfort. "Says here you've been refusing physical therapy." Ethan shifted slightly. "I went yesterday." You went for 15 minutes, then told them you were tired and quit. I was tired. You were lying in bed. How tired could you be? Ethan stared at her. Most of the staff treated him with careful kindness, like he was fragile, breakable. Claire looked at him like he was wasting her time. I don't need a lecture, he said. Good. I wasn't planning on giving you one. She set the tablet down and crossed her arms. But if you think I'm going to stand around and watch you feel sorry for yourself, you're wrong. You've got a choice here. You can do the work and maybe get some of your life back, or you can lie there and rot. I don't care which one you pick, but you're going to pick one. Ethan's hands clenched the blanket. You have no idea what I'm going through. You're right, I don't. Claire's voice didn't soften. But I know what it looks like when somebody gives up, and you're about 3 days away from it. Get out. She didn't move. I'll leave when my shift's over. Until then, you're stuck with me. Ethan turned his head away, fury rising in his chest. Who the hell did she think she was? He wanted Angela back. He wanted someone who understood that he needed time, that he was still processing everything, that he couldn't just snap his fingers and be fine. Your wife called the nurses' station this morning, Claire said. Ethan went still. She wanted to know when you'd be discharged. Said she needed to make arrangements. He turned back toward her. What kind of arrangements? Claire shrugged. She didn't say, but she didn't sound like someone planning to bring you home. The words hit him harder than they should have. Ethan already knew somewhere deep down that Savannah wasn't coming back, but hearing it confirmed, even indirectly, made it real in a way he hadn't been ready for. Thanks for the update, he said coldly. Claire studied him for a moment, then picked up her tablet again. Physical therapy's in an hour. I'll be back to take you down. I'm not going. Yes, you are. You can't make me. You're right, Claire said. But if you don't go, I'm going to stand here and talk to you for the next 3 hours about every single boring detail of my day until you're begging me to wheel you out of here just to get some peace. Ethan almost laughed. Almost. Instead, he just closed his eyes and let the silence stretch out between them. After a minute, Claire left. An hour later, she came back, just like she said she would. Ethan had spent the time staring at the ceiling, trying to decide if he actually cared enough to fight her on this. When she walked in, she didn't say anything. She just moved to the side of the bed and started adjusting the wheelchair. I can do it myself, Ethan muttered. Then do it. He hated how much effort it took, hated the awkward shift from bed to chair, the way his legs just hung there, dead weight. Hated that Claire stood there watching, not helping unless he asked, which he refused to do. By the time he was in the chair, he was breathing hard, and she still hadn't said a word. Let's go, she said. The physical therapy room was on the second floor, a wide space filled with equipment, mats, and other patients in various stages of recovery. Ethan recognized a few faces from previous sessions. A man in his 60s working on his balance, a younger woman with a prosthetic leg practicing her gait. Everyone looked focused, determined. Ethan just felt tired. The therapist, a guy named Kyle, greeted them with his usual enthusiasm. Hey, Ethan, good to see you back. Yeah. Kyle didn't seem to notice the lack of energy in Ethan's voice. He launched into the same routine they'd been doing for days. Range of motion exercises, resistance work, attempts to stimulate nerve response. Most of it felt pointless. Ethan went through the motions because it was easier than arguing, but he didn't believe any of it would make a difference. Claire stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching. You're not even trying, she said after about 20 minutes. Kyle looked between them, clearly unsure whether to intervene. I'm doing what he's telling me to do, Ethan said. You're going through the motions. That's not the same thing. What do you want from me? I want you to actually try. Ethan's frustration boiled over. For what? So I can maybe get a little bit of sensation back in my legs? So I can spend the rest of my life in this chair instead of completely bedridden? That's the best case scenario here, and you're acting like I should be grateful for it. Claire didn't flinch. You're right. That might be the best case scenario. So what? You'd rather just quit now and guarantee you end up worse off? I'd rather not waste my time on false hope. Then don't hope, Claire said. Just work. Do the exercises because they keep your muscles from atrophying. Do the therapy because it keeps your circulation going. Do it because it's better than lying in that bed waiting to die. Kyle cleared his throat. Maybe we should take a break. No, Ethan said, his eyes still locked on Claire. Let's finish. He pushed harder through the rest of the session, not because he believed it would help, but because he refused to let her be right about him giving up. By the time they were done, his arms ached and his chest was tight with exhaustion. Claire wheeled him back to his room in silence. When they got there, she helped him back into bed, still without saying much, and then grabbed her bag. I'll see you tomorrow, she said. Ethan didn't respond. After she left, he lay there in the quiet, his mind spinning. He kept thinking about what she'd said. You're about 3 days away from giving up. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been sliding toward that edge without even realizing it. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Bradley. Need your signature on some documents. I'll stop by tomorrow. Ethan deleted it. Then he scrolled to Savannah's voicemail, and before he could talk himself out of it, hit play. Her voice filled the room, smooth and controlled, the same tone she used when she was trying to sound reasonable. Ethan, it's me. I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, but we need to talk. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I can't do this anymore. I can't be the person you need me to be. I'm sorry. I really am. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce. I hope you understand. The message ended. Ethan stared at the phone, the words echoing in his head. I can't be the person you need me to be. It wasn't even an explanation, just an excuse. A way to make leaving him sound like some kind of noble sacrifice instead of what it really was, abandonment. He thought about calling her back, demanding a real conversation, but what was the point? She'd already made her choice. Instead, he opened his email and found the message he'd been avoiding, the one from her lawyer, divorce papers, attached as a PDF. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. He already knew what it would say. Savannah was gone. His company was slipping away. His body had betrayed him, and the only person who seemed to give a damn whether he lived or died was a caregiver who barely tolerated him. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but all he could see was the wreckage of everything he used to be. Tick-tick. The next morning, Claire showed up at 7, same as before. This time, she brought coffee. I didn't ask for that, Ethan said. I know, I got it for me, but there's an extra cup if you want it. He took it. It was black, no sugar, exactly how he liked it. He didn't ask how she knew. Physical therapy at 9, Claire said. Then you've got a meeting with your doctor at 11. I don't want to meet with the doctor. Too bad. Ethan sipped the coffee and watched her move around the room, checking monitors, adjusting things. She worked with the same efficiency as yesterday, no wasted movement, no unnecessary conversation. Why are you doing this? He asked. Claire glanced at him. Doing what? This job. Taking care of people like me. She didn't answer right away. She finished what she was doing, then sat down in the chair by the window. I was in a car accident 6 years ago, she said. Broke my back in 3 places. Doctor said I'd never walk again. Ethan stared at her. Took me 2 years of rehab, but I proved them wrong. She leaned back in the chair. So yeah, I know what it's like to be where you are, and I know what it takes to get out of it. That's not the same thing. You're right, it's not. Your injury might be worse than mine was, or it might not be. But either way, the choice is the same. You can fight, or you can quit. Ethan looked away. What if fighting doesn't change anything? Then at least you'll know you tried. The words sat heavy between them. Ethan wanted to argue, to push back, but he didn't have the energy. Instead, he just drank his coffee and let the silence settle. At 9, Claire took him down to physical therapy again. This time, he didn't complain. He didn't push himself any harder than before, but he didn't quit early either. He just did the work. Kyle seemed pleased. That's good, Ethan. Keep it up. Afterward, Claire wheeled him to the doctor's office. Dr. Patel was a neurologist, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who had been overseeing Ethan's case since the beginning. She greeted him with a small smile and pulled up his charts on the computer. How are you feeling? She asked. Like hell. She nodded, like that was the answer she expected. I've been reviewing your scans and I wanted to discuss your prognosis. Ethan's stomach tightened. Just tell me. Doctor. Patel folded her hands on the desk. The damage to your spinal cord is significant. We've seen some reduction in swelling, which is encouraging, but the initial injury was severe. At this point, I can't predict with certainty whether you'll regain full mobility. What about partial? It's possible. With continued therapy, you may regain some sensation and limited movement. But I want to be honest with you, Ethan. The likelihood of you walking unassisted again is very low. The words hit him like a second crash. He'd known logically that this was the reality, but hearing it out loud from a doctor who had no reason to sugarcoat it made it final. So I'm stuck in this chair. For now, yes, but that doesn't mean your life is over. Ethan almost laughed. Doesn't it? Dr. Patel's expression softened. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but I've seen patients with similar injuries go on to live full, meaningful lives. It's not the same life you had before, but it can still be good. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. After the appointment, Claire wheeled him back to his room in silence. When they got there, she didn't leave right away. She stood by the door, arms crossed, watching him. You okay? She asked. Does it matter? Yeah, it does. Ethan looked at her, this woman who had walked into his life 2 days ago and refused to let him wallow. He didn't understand her, didn't understand why she cared or why she kept pushing him when everyone else had already written him off. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. Claire stepped closer. You do it one day at a time. One exercise. One meal. One breath. You don't have to figure out the rest of your life right now. You just have to get through today. Ethan nodded, even though he didn't really believe her. Get some rest, Claire said. I'll be back this afternoon. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the quiet of his room, staring at the wall. His phone buzzed, but he didn't check it. He didn't want to see another message from Bradley, or another email from Savannah's lawyer, or another reminder of everything he'd lost. Instead, he thought about what Dr. Patel had said. Your life isn't over. Maybe not, but it sure as hell felt like it. Bus. That afternoon, Bradley showed up. Ethan heard him before he saw him, loud footsteps in the hallway, the confident stride of someone who owned every room he walked into. When the door opened, Bradley filled the frame, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Ethan's hospital bill. There he is, Bradley said, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. How you holding up, little brother? I've been better. Bradley pulled up a chair and sat down, setting a leather briefcase on the floor beside him. I can imagine. Hell of a thing. What happened to you? Ethan didn't respond. Listen, Bradley continued. I know you've got a lot on your plate right now, so I've been handling things at the office, making sure everything keeps running smooth while you focus on recovery. I didn't ask you to do that. I know, but family steps up, right? Bradley leaned back in the chair, completely at ease. Anyway, I need you to sign off on a few things. Just routine stuff. Contracts? Approvals? Nothing major. He pulled a stack of papers out of the briefcase and set them on the table beside Ethan's bed. Ethan glanced at them. What kind of contracts? Standard client agreements. A couple of vendor deals. Like I said, routine. Then why do you need my signature? Bradley's smile tightened. Because you're still the CEO, Ethan. I can't make executive decisions without your approval. Ethan picked up the top document and scanned it. It was dense, full of legal jargon, the kind of thing that would take hours to read through properly. He flipped to the signature line and saw his name typed at the bottom. I need to review these, Ethan said. Sure, take your time. Bradley stood up. But don't take too long. We've got deadlines on some of these. After Bradley left, Ethan stared at the stack of papers. Something about the whole conversation felt off. Bradley had never been the type to help without expecting something in return. And the way he'd brushed off Ethan's questions, the casual tone, the rush to get signatures, it all set off warning bells. Ethan reached for his phone and called the one person he still trusted at the company, his assistant, Monica. She answered on the second ring. Ethan, oh my God, how are you? I've been better. Listen, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Bradley just brought me some documents to sign. I want you to pull the original contracts and compare them to what he gave me. Let me know if anything's changed. There was a pause. Ethan, I don't have access to those files anymore. What do you mean? Bradley locked me out of the system last week, said it was a security update, but I think... She lowered her voice. I think he's trying to push me out. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. Did he say why? No, but he's been bringing in his own people, restructuring departments. A lot of the senior staff are worried. Monica, I need you to get me copies of everything Bradley's been doing. Emails, meeting notes, financial reports, anything you can find. I'll try. But Ethan, be careful. Your brother's moving fast and he's got a lot of people on his side now. After they hung up, Ethan sat there staring at the documents Bradley had left behind. His company was being stolen out from under him, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it from a hospital bed. He thought about calling a lawyer, but who would take him seriously? He was a man who couldn't even walk to the bathroom by himself. Who would believe he could still run a company? The door opened and Claire walked in, carrying a tray of food. Dinner, she said, setting it down on the table. Ethan barely looked at it. I'm not hungry. Claire sat down in the chair and crossed her arms. What happened? Nothing. Bullshit. You've got that look. What look? The one that says somebody just screwed you over and you're trying to figure out how bad it is. Ethan let out a bitter laugh. My brother's taking over my company. My wife's divorcing me. I can't walk. Take your pick. Claire didn't offer sympathy. She just looked at him, steady and unflinching. So what are you going to do about it? She asked. What can I do? Fight back. How? I can't even get out of this bed without help. Then get help, Claire said. You've got people who still care about what happens to you. Use them. Stop acting like you're already dead and start acting like someone who's got something to lose. Ethan stared at her. She made it sound so simple, like all he had to do was decide to fight and everything would fall into place. But maybe she was right. Maybe the first step was just deciding that he wasn't done yet. I need a lawyer, Ethan said. Claire nodded. I know someone. I'll make a call. 2 days later, Daniel Prescott walked into Ethan's hospital room. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that reminded Ethan of Claire. Mr. Calloway, Daniel said, shaking Ethan's hand. Claire tells me you've got a problem. That's putting it mildly. Daniel sat down and pulled out a legal pad. Tell me everything. Ethan laid it all out. The accident, Savannah's disappearance, the divorce, Bradley's takeover, the documents he'd been asked to sign. Daniel listened without interrupting, taking notes, asking occasional questions. When Ethan finished, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Your brother's playing a long game, he said. He's positioning himself to take control of the company permanently. If you sign those documents, you'll be handing him everything. Can I stop him? Maybe, but it's going to be a fight, and right now, you're not in a position to win it. Ethan's jaw tightened. What do you mean? You're in a hospital bed. You can't attend board meetings. You can't oversee operations. From a legal standpoint, your brother has a legitimate argument that the company needs active leadership. So I'm just supposed to let him have it? No, Daniel said, but you need to be strategic. First, don't sign anything else Bradley gives you. Second, we need to gather evidence of any wrongdoing on his part. If he's making decisions without proper authorization, or if he's misrepresenting his role, we can challenge him. And the divorce? Daniel's expression darkened. That's a separate issue. But based on what you've told me, your wife's timing is suspicious. Filing for divorce while you're incapacitated could be seen as an attempt to take advantage of your situation. We can fight it, but again, it's going to take time. Ethan felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. 2 battles, both of which he was completely unprepared to fight. I'll do what I can, Ethan said. Daniel stood up. Good. I'll start digging into your brother's activities. In the meantime, focus on your recovery. The stronger you are, the better our case will be. After Daniel left, Ethan sat in silence, trying to process everything. His life had become a war on multiple fronts, and he was barely holding the line. Claire came in a few minutes later, carrying her usual bag. How'd it go? She asked. He says I need to fight. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. Ethan looked at her. Why do you care so much about this? Claire set her bag down and met his eyes. Because I've seen what happens when people give up. I've watched them fade away piece by piece until there's nothing left. And I'm not going to let that happen to you. You don't even know me. I know enough. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and Claire got to work. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's routine became a grind. Physical therapy every morning, meetings with Daniel in the afternoons. Evenings spent reviewing documents, trying to piece together what Bradley was doing with his company. Claire was there through all of it, pushing him when he wanted to quit, sitting with him when the frustration became too much. She didn't coddle him, didn't offer false hope, but she also didn't let him spiral. Slowly, Ethan started to notice small changes. His arms got stronger, his endurance improved. He still couldn't feel his legs, still couldn't walk, but he could transfer himself in and out of the wheelchair without help. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then, one afternoon, Monica called with news. "I found something," she said, her voice urgent. "Bradley's been moving money, large amounts, into accounts I don't recognize." Ethan's pulse quickened. "How much?" "Hundreds of thousands, maybe more. I'm still digging, but Ethan, if this is what I think it is, send me everything you've got." Within an hour, Ethan was sitting with Daniel going over the financial records Monica had managed to pull. Daniel's expression grew darker with every page. "This is embezzlement," Daniel said. "If we can prove Bradley's been siphoning money out of the company for personal use, we can not only stop him from taking over, we can have him removed entirely. Can we prove it?" "With these records, absolutely." For the first time since the accident, Ethan felt something other than despair. He felt anger. And anger, he was learning, could be a hell of a lot more useful than self-pity. "Let's take him down," Ethan said. Daniel smiled. "Now you're talking." The evidence came in pieces over the next 2 weeks, and every new document made the picture clearer. Bradley wasn't just managing Callaway logistics. He was gutting it. Wire transfers to offshore accounts, consulting fees paid to shell companies that didn't exist, contracts renegotiated at rates that made no business sense unless someone was getting a kickback. Daniel worked through it all methodically, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. Ethan spent his mornings in physical therapy and his afternoons buried in spreadsheets, cross-referencing Monica's findings with the company's official books. Claire had set up a small workspace in his hospital room, a folding table, a laptop Monica had smuggled in, stacks of documents organized in folders. It wasn't much, but it gave Ethan something he hadn't had since the accident: purpose. "You're going to burn yourself out," Claire said one evening, watching him squint at the laptop screen for the 3rd hour straight. "I'm fine." "Your neck's been locked in that position for 45 minutes. You're not fine." Ethan leaned back in the wheelchair and rubbed his eyes. She was right, as usual. His back ached from sitting hunched over, and his head was starting to pound. "5 more minutes," he said. "That's what you said an hour ago." Claire walked over and closed the laptop. "You need to eat and sleep, and maybe remember that you're still recovering from a spinal injury." "I don't have time to recover. Bradley's moving fast." "And you're moving faster, but you're not going to do anyone any good if you collapse before we even get to court." She handed him a protein shake from the small fridge. "Drink this, then get some rest." Ethan took the shake but didn't drink it right away. He just sat there, staring at the closed laptop, feeling the familiar frustration rise in his chest. Everything took so much longer now, moving from the bed to the chair, getting dressed, eating. Even thinking felt harder when his body was constantly reminding him how broken it was. "I used to run 10 miles before breakfast," he said quietly. Claire didn't offer platitudes. She just pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. "Yeah, and I used to dance, had a whole career planned out. Then my accident happened, and that was over." Ethan looked at her. She'd mentioned the accident before, but never in detail. "What kind of dancing?" "Ballet. I was good too. Good enough that I'd just gotten accepted into a company in New York when some idiot ran a red light and T-boned me on my way home from rehearsal." She shrugged. "Broke my spine in 3 places. Shattered my hip. The surgeons put me back together, but dancing was done." "How'd you deal with it?" "Badly at first. I spent about 6 months feeling sorry for myself, pushing everyone away, convinced my life was over." She met his eyes. "Then I realized I could either stay miserable or find something else to live for. So I became a physical therapist, then a caregiver. Turns out I'm pretty good at that too." "You ever miss it, dancing?" "Every single day." Claire's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, a thread of old grief that never quite went away. But missing something doesn't mean your life stops. It just means you learn to carry it differently. Ethan drank the shake in silence, letting her words settle. He wasn't sure he believed her yet. Wasn't sure he could see a future where this constant loss felt like anything other than a weight dragging him under. But maybe that was okay. Maybe he didn't have to believe it right now. He just had to keep moving forward. His phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Got the full audit. Bradley's been skimming for at least 18 months. We have enough to bury him. Meeting tomorrow at 2? Ethan typed back a quick confirmation, then looked at Claire. We're ready to move. She nodded. Good. About damn time. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived with a briefcase full of documents and a grim expression that told Ethan this was about to get ugly. They spread everything out on the folding table. Financial records, emails Monica had forwarded, bank statements showing the offshore transfers. It was damning. More than damning. It was a roadmap of betrayal that went back further than Ethan had realized. Your brother's been planning this for a while, Daniel said, tapping one of the spreadsheets. These transfers started 6 months before your accident. He's been positioning himself to take over long before you were ever injured. Ethan's jaw tightened. So the accident just gave him an excuse to move faster. Exactly. And if you'd signed those documents he brought you, he would have had full legal authority to act on your behalf. You would have handed him the company without even knowing it. What's our next move? Daniel leaned back in his chair. We go to the board, present the evidence, force them to remove Bradley and launch a formal investigation. If they refuse, we take it public and let the press do the rest. And if he fights back, he will, but he's the one who's been stealing, not you. As long as we control the narrative, he's finished. Ethan nodded slowly. It felt surreal, planning to destroy his own brother. They'd never been close. Bradley was 8 years older, always the favored son, always the one their father had groomed to take over the family's old construction business before Ethan had broken away and built his own thing. But this wasn't sibling rivalry. This was betrayal on a level Ethan hadn't thought Bradley capable of. When do we move? Ethan asked. Tomorrow. I've already scheduled an emergency board meeting. Bradley doesn't know yet, so we'll have the element of surprise. He's going to come after me hard. Let him, Daniel said. We've got the truth on our side. That's more than he has. After Daniel left, Ethan sat alone with the documents, reading through them again. Part of him wanted to call Bradley, confront him directly, demand to know why. But he already knew the answer. Bradley had always wanted what Ethan had. Always resented the fact that his younger brother had built something successful without the family name, without their father's help. And when the opportunity came to take it, Bradley hadn't hesitated. Claire knocked on the door frame, even though the door was already open. You okay? Not really. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. You want to talk about it? What's there to talk about? My brother's been stealing from me for over a year, and I was too blind to see it. You weren't blind. You trusted him. That's not the same thing. Feels pretty similar right now. Claire sat down on the edge of the bed. You know what I learned after my accident? The people who stick around are the ones who matter. Everyone else is just noise. And if nobody sticks around, then you find new people. She looked at him pointedly. You've got Monica. You've got Daniel. You've got me. That's not nobody. Ethan managed a small, tired smile. You're getting paid to be here. Yeah, and I could be getting paid to take care of someone a lot less stubborn. But here I am. He laughed despite himself. It felt strange, laughing in the middle of everything falling apart. But maybe that was the point. Maybe you had to find those small moments of lightness, or the weight of it all would crush you. Thanks, he said. For what? For not giving up on me. Claire stood up and headed for the door. I don't give up on people, Ethan, even when they give up on themselves. The board meeting was set for 10 the next morning, but Bradley showed up at the hospital at 7, unannounced and furious. Ethan heard him in the hallway before he even reached the room, his voice loud and sharp, as he argued with one of the nurses about visiting hours. Then the door slammed open, and Bradley stormed in like he owned the place. What the hell do you think you're doing? Bradley demanded. Ethan, still in bed, kept his expression neutral. You're going to have to be more specific. Don't play games with me. I just got a call from the board. An emergency meeting? What are you trying to pull? I'm not pulling anything. I'm taking back my company. Bradley's face flushed red. Your company? You've been lying in a hospital bed for 2 months. I'm the one who's been keeping it alive. By stealing from it. The accusation hung in the air between them. Bradley's expression shifted from anger to something colder, more calculated. I don't know what you think you found, but you're making a mistake. Am I? Ethan reached for the folder on the table beside his bed and pulled out one of the bank statements. Because this says you transferred $200,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. And this one says you paid $250,000 to a consulting firm that doesn't actually exist. Should I keep going? Bradley's jaw tightened. Those were legitimate business expenses. Prove it. I don't have to prove anything to you. You do if you want to keep your position. And from where I'm sitting, you're about to lose a lot more than that. Bradley stepped closer to the bed, his voice dropping to something low and dangerous. You're making a huge mistake, Ethan. You think you can just waltz back in and take over? You can't even walk. You can't run a company from a wheelchair. Maybe not, but I can sure as hell make sure you don't run it either. For a moment, Bradley just stared at him, and Ethan could see the rage simmering beneath the surface. Then, without another word, Bradley turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Ethan let out a slow breath. His hands were shaking, adrenaline still flooding his system. He hadn't realized how much he'd been dreading that confrontation until it was over. Claire appeared in the doorway a moment later. I heard shouting. You good? Yeah, Bradley knows. Good. Let him sweat. The board meeting took place in a conference room at Callaway Logistics headquarters, but Ethan attended via video call from the hospital. Daniel had set up the laptop and camera, and Monica had made sure the connection was stable. Ethan wore a button-down shirt and sat as upright as he could manage in the wheelchair, trying to project an image of control, even though his heart was racing. The board members filed in one by one, 7 in total, a mix of early investors and senior executives. Bradley was already seated at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. When everyone was settled, the board chair, a man named Richard Holbrook, called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Richard said. Ethan has requested this meeting to address some concerns regarding the company's recent operations. Ethan, the floor is yours. Ethan took a breath and launched into it. He kept his voice steady, laying out the evidence piece by piece, the offshore transfers, the fake consulting contracts, the inflated vendor agreements. He walked them through every document, every transaction, every lie Bradley had constructed over the past 18 months. Bradley sat perfectly still through all of it, his face a mask of calm. But Ethan could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of the table. When Ethan finished, Richard turned to Bradley. Do you have a response? Bradley leaned forward, his voice smooth and controlled. Ethan's been through a traumatic experience. I understand that he's looking for someone to blame for what happened to him, and unfortunately, I seem to be the target. But these allegations are baseless. Every transaction he mentioned was approved through proper channels and documented accordingly. Then you'll have no problem providing those documents, Daniel said from beside Ethan. Bradley's eyes flicked to the camera. Who are you? Daniel Prescott, Mr. Callaway's attorney. This is a private board meeting. You have no authority here. Richard intervened. Bradley, if you have documentation that disputes these claims, now would be the time to present it. Bradley hesitated, and in that moment of silence, Ethan knew he had him. Bradley didn't have the documents because they didn't exist. Everything had been off the books, hidden in layers of shell companies and fake invoices. And now, under scrutiny, it was all falling apart. I'll need time to gather everything, Bradley said. How much time? Richard asked. A few days. You've had 18 months, Ethan said flatly. You should have everything at your fingertips. Bradley's mask finally cracked. You don't know what you're talking about. You've been absent for months. You have no idea what it takes to run this company. I know it doesn't involve stealing. I didn't steal anything. Then explain the offshore accounts. Bradley stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. Ethan's clearly not in his right mind, and I won't be accused of crimes I didn't commit. Richard's voice was firm. Sit down, Bradley. No, this meeting is over. Bradley, if you walk out of here, we'll have no choice but to suspend you pending an investigation. Bradley's face went pale. You can't do that. We can, and we will. Richard looked around the table at the other board members. All in favor of suspending Bradley Calloway from his position effective immediately? 6 hands went up. Only Bradley's remained down. Motion carries, Richard said. Bradley, you're suspended. Please surrender your access credentials and leave the premises. But Bradley looked like he'd been struck. He stared at the board members, then at the camera where Ethan watched, his expression shifting from shock to pure hatred. This isn't over, he said quietly. Yeah, it is, Ethan said. Bradley grabbed his briefcase and walked out without another word. The door slammed behind him, and the room fell into heavy silence. Richard cleared his throat. Ethan, we'll be launching a full audit and working with law enforcement to investigate these allegations. In the meantime, we need to discuss interim leadership. I'll return as CEO as soon as I'm discharged, Ethan said. With all due respect, we need someone on site, someone who can be physically present. Ethan felt the words like a punch. He'd known this was coming, but it still stung. I understand. I'd like to nominate Monica Chen as interim CEO. She knows the company inside and out, and she's been keeping things running while Bradley was busy looting it. Richard looked thoughtful. I'll put it to a vote. All in favor? 5 hands went up. 2 abstained. Motion carries. Monica, are you willing to accept the position? Monica, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, looked stunned. Yes, of course. Good. We'll reconvene next week to discuss next steps. This meeting is adjourned. The screen went black as the connection ended. Ethan sat back in the wheelchair, exhausted. He'd won, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like survival. Claire had been standing in the corner of the hospital room the entire time, listening. Now she walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. You did good. I lost my company. You lost the title. You didn't lose the company, and you got rid of the guy who was destroying it. That's a win. Ethan wasn't sure he agreed, but he was too tired to argue. He closed the laptop and let Claire help him back into bed. Every muscle in his body ached, and his head felt like it was splitting open. Get some rest, Claire said. You've earned it. But rest didn't come easy. Ethan lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the meeting over and over in his head. Bradley's face when the board voted to suspend him. The way he'd looked at Ethan through the camera, like he wanted to reach through the screen and destroy him. Ethan's phone buzzed around midnight. A text from an unknown number. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. He didn't respond. He just turned off the phone and tried to sleep. The next morning, Claire came in earlier than usual, her expression tight. We need to talk. Ethan sat up. What happened? Savannah called the nurses' station this morning. She's coming by later today. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Why? She didn't say, but I'm guessing it has something to do with the board meeting yesterday. How would she even know about that? Claire shrugged. News travels fast, especially when it involves a suspension and potential criminal charges. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He hadn't heard from Savannah in weeks, not since the voicemail. The divorce papers were still sitting unsigned in his email, a reminder of everything he'd been avoiding, and now she was coming here. I don't want to see her, Ethan said. You don't have a choice. She's still your wife, legally. The hospital can't keep her out. Ethan felt trapped. He was stuck in this bed, in this room, with no way to escape whatever confrontation was about to happen. All he could do was wait. Savannah arrived just after lunch, dressed in a tailored black dress and heels, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She looked exactly the same as she had before the accident, polished, composed, untouchable. She smiled at the nurse who let her in, then closed the door behind her and turned to face Ethan. Hi, she said softly. Ethan didn't respond. Savannah walked closer to the bed, her heels clicking on the tile floor. You look better, healthier. What do you want, Savannah? She flinched at the coldness in his voice, but recovered quickly. I heard about what happened with Bradley. That must have been hard. You didn't come here to talk about Bradley. No, I came to talk about us. Ethan almost laughed. There is no us. You made that pretty clear when you left. I know, and I'm sorry, I handled everything badly. Savannah sat down in the chair beside the bed, folding her hands in her lap. But I've had time to think, Ethan, a lot of time, and I realize now that I made a mistake. What kind of mistake? Leaving you, walking away when you needed me most. Her eyes filled with tears, and Ethan couldn't tell if they were real or rehearsed. I was scared. I didn't know how to handle what happened to you, and I panicked. But I never stopped caring about you. Ethan stared at her, trying to process what he was hearing. She sounded sincere. She looked sincere, but everything about this felt wrong. Why now? He asked. Because I miss you. Because I still love you. She reached for his hand, but he pulled it away. You filed for divorce. I know, and I regret it. I was confused and overwhelmed, and I thought leaving was the only option. But now I see that we can get through this together. I want to help you, Ethan. I want to be here for you. Ethan felt something cold settle in his chest. Savannah had disappeared the moment his life fell apart. She'd taken everything and run, leaving him to drown. And now, after he'd clawed his way back to some semblance of stability, she was here, claiming she wanted to help. Where were you 2 months ago? Ethan asked quietly. Savannah's face crumpled. I told you I was scared. Where were you when I couldn't move? When I couldn't even sit up by myself? Where were you when the doctors told me I'd never walk again? His voice rose with each question. You weren't here, Savannah. You left me to deal with all of it alone. That's not fair. You're right. It's not fair. None of this is fair. But you don't get to walk back in now and pretend you care. Savannah stood up, her composure slipping. I do care. I made a mistake, but that doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Love? Ethan shook his head. You don't even know what that word means. Ethan, please, get out. Just listen to me. Get out. Savannah stepped back, her eyes wide. For a moment, she just stood there looking at him like she didn't recognize the man in the bed. Then she turned and walked to the door. But before she left, she looked back at him one last time. I'm not giving up on us, she said. Then she was gone. Ethan sat there in the silence, his chest tight and his hands shaking. He felt like he'd just been hit by another car. Everything Savannah had said sounded reasonable on the surface, but underneath it all, there was something hollow, something manipulative, and he didn't trust it for a second. Claire came in a few minutes later, her expression dark. I saw her leave. You okay? No. She sat down on the edge of the bed. What did she want? To come back. She said she made a mistake leaving me and wants another chance. Claire's jaw tightened. And you told her to go to hell, right? More or less. Good. Because that woman doesn't care about you. She cares about what you represent. What do you mean? Think about it. She left when you had nothing. Now you've taken down your brother, you've got the board on your side, and you're fighting your way back. Suddenly, she's interested again. Claire shook her head. She doesn't want you. She wants the man she thought you were before the accident, and the second things get hard again, she'll bail. Ethan knew she was right. He'd known it the moment Savannah walked through the door, but hearing Claire say it out loud made it real. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Ethan said quietly. Doing what? Fighting. Every day it's something new. Bradley, Savannah, my own body. I'm so damn tired. Claire didn't try to talk him out of it. She just sat there, letting him feel it. Then, after a long moment, she spoke. You know what got me through my recovery? She said. Anger. Pure, stubborn anger. I was furious at the driver who hit me. Furious at the doctors who told me I'd never dance again. Furious at everyone who looked at me like I was broken. And I used that anger to keep going. I'm not angry. I'm just exhausted. Then get angry. Because exhaustion will make you quit. Anger will make you fight. Ethan looked at her, this woman who had walked into his life and refused to let him fall apart. She was right. She was always right. Okay, he said. I'll fight. Claire smiled. Good, because this isn't over yet. She was right about the fight not being over. 3 days after Savannah's visit, Daniel called with news that made Ethan's blood run cold. She's filing for conservatorship, Daniel said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Claims you're mentally unstable and unable to make sound decisions about your health or finances. Ethan gripped the phone hard enough that his knuckles went white. On what grounds? The accident, your injury. And apparently she's claiming that your relationship with Claire is evidence of impaired judgment. My relationship with Claire? Ethan's voice rose. She's my caregiver. I know that, But Savannah's spinning it as something else. She's arguing that you've become emotionally dependent on someone you barely know, and that it's proof you're vulnerable and easily manipulated. Ethan wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, he forced himself to breathe, to think, what does this mean? If she wins, she gets legal authority over your medical care, your finances, everything. You'd essentially become a ward under her control. She can't do that. She can try, and given your current situation, a judge might actually listen. Daniel paused. Ethan, I need you to be honest with me. Is there anything going on between you and Claire? No, she's my caregiver, that's it. Good, because if there's even a hint of impropriety, Savannah will use it to destroy you. After the call ended, Ethan sat in the wheelchair, staring at nothing. This wasn't just about money anymore. This wasn't even about the company. Savannah was trying to take away the last thing he had left, his autonomy, his right to make his own choices, and she was using Claire to do it. Claire came in during her afternoon shift and immediately noticed something was wrong. What happened? Ethan told her everything. As he spoke, he watched her face shift from concern to something harder, more dangerous. She's trying to paint me as a problem, Claire said flatly. She's trying to paint both of us as problems. Then we need to be smart about this. Claire sat down, her mind clearly working through scenarios. No more closed-door conversations. Everything stays professional. I'll make sure there's always a witness around when I'm helping you. Claire, you shouldn't have to change how you do your job because of her. I'm not changing how I do my job. I'm protecting both of us from a woman who's clearly willing to lie to get what she wants. Ethan felt a surge of guilt. Claire had done nothing but help him, and now she was being dragged into his mess. I'm sorry, you didn't sign up for this. No, I signed up to be your caregiver, and part of that job is making sure nobody takes advantage of you while you're recovering. She met his eyes. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan, but we need to be careful. The conservatorship hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which gave Daniel time to build a defense, but not much else. Ethan threw himself into preparing, working with Daniel to document everything: his cognitive function, his decision-making capacity, his progress in therapy. They brought in Dr. Patel to testify about his mental state. They gathered character witnesses, including Monica and several former colleagues who could speak to his competence. But Savannah had her own arsenal. She hired a high-profile attorney named Victoria Cross, a woman known for winning impossible cases through sheer aggression. And she started building her narrative carefully, leaking details to the press about Ethan's decline and his concerning attachment to his caregiver. The first article appeared in a local business journal, a short piece about the turmoil at Callaway Logistics. It mentioned Bradley's suspension and the ongoing investigation, but it also included a paragraph about Ethan's prolonged recovery and questions about his ability to lead. The article quoted an anonymous source close to the family who expressed concern about Ethan's judgment. The second article was worse. It appeared in a tabloid-style website, complete with a photo of the hospital and a headline that read, "Disabled CEO's strange romance with caregiver raises questions." The piece was full of innuendo and half-truths, painting Claire as some kind of opportunist who'd wormed her way into Ethan's life while he was vulnerable. Claire read it on her phone during a break and immediately threw the device across the room. It hit the wall and clattered to the floor, the screen cracking. "Hey," Ethan said. "It's just garbage. Nobody who matters will believe it." "It doesn't matter if they believe it. The damage is already done." Claire's voice shook with anger. "She's making me look like I'm taking advantage of you, like I'm some kind of predator." "Anyone who knows you knows that's not true." "Do they? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks pretty bad." She paced the room, her hands clenched into fists. "I've spent 6 years building a reputation in this field, 6 years of working my ass off to help people recover. And now this woman is going to destroy all of that because she wants control of your money." Ethan wanted to fix it, to make it right, but he didn't know how. Everything he touched seemed to fall apart. "I'll have Daniel issue a statement. We'll set the record straight." "A statement won't fix this. People believe what they want to believe." Claire stopped pacing and looked at him, her eyes hard. "Maybe I should step back. Get another caregiver assigned to you until this is over." "No." "Ethan, no. That's exactly what she wants. She wants to isolate me, make it look like I can't function without her managing everything. If you leave, it proves her point." Claire shook her head. And if I stay, it proves hers. They were trapped, and they both knew it. No matter what they did, Savannah would twist it into evidence of Ethan's instability. Daniel called that evening with more bad news. Victoria Cross filed a motion to expedite the hearing. She's arguing that Ethan's condition is deteriorating and that immediate intervention is necessary. My condition isn't deteriorating, Ethan said. I know, but she's going to parade a bunch of doctors in front of the judge who will say otherwise. We need to be ready for that. What kind of doctors? Psychiatrists, mostly. She's going to argue that the trauma from the accident, combined with the stress of the board situation and the divorce, has left you incapable of making rational decisions. Ethan felt the walls closing in. So what do? We fight. We bring in our own experts. We show the judge that you're competent, that you're making progress, and that Savannah's real motivation here is financial, not concern for your well-being. Can we prove that? Maybe. I'm digging into her finances now. If she's in debt, or if there's any evidence she's after your money, we can use it. After Daniel hung up, Ethan sat alone in the dark, listening to the sounds of the hospital around him. Footsteps in the hallway, a distant monitor beeping, someone crying in another room. He felt like he was drowning again, the same way he had in the weeks right after the accident, except this time he was supposed to be stronger. He was supposed to be fighting back, but fighting required energy he didn't have. Every battle took something from him, and he wasn't sure how much more he could lose before there was nothing left. Claire came back later that night, after her shift had officially ended. She knocked softly on the door, then entered when Ethan told her to come in. You should be home, he said. Probably. She sat down in the chair by the window, the same spot she always chose. But I figured you could use the company. They sat in silence for a while, neither of them needing to fill the space with words. Eventually, Claire spoke. I was engaged once, she said, before my accident. His name was Marcus. We'd been together 3 years, and he proposed right after I got accepted into the company in New York. Ethan looked at her, surprised. She'd never mentioned this before. After the accident, he stayed for about 6 months, visited me in the hospital, came to therapy sessions, said all the right things, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't love me anymore. He loved the version of me that could dance, that was going somewhere, that fit into his vision of the future. The broken version didn't interest him. What happened? He left, told me he couldn't handle it, that it was too hard watching me struggle, made it sound like he was the victim. Claire's voice was bitter. I was devastated at first. Then I realized I was better off without someone who only loved me conditionally. Is that why you became a caregiver? To help people who've been abandoned? Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to prove that people like us aren't disposable. She looked at him. Savannah sees you the same way Marcus saw me, as someone who's broken and not worth the effort. But she's wrong. You're not broken, Ethan. You're just rebuilding. Ethan wanted to believe her, but it was hard to feel like anything other than a burden when the entire world seemed determined to prove him incompetent. What if she wins? He asked quietly. She won't. But what if she does? Claire leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Then we'll fight it. We'll appeal. We'll do whatever it takes. But I'm not letting that woman take control of your life. The hearing was held in a courthouse downtown, a gray stone building that felt more like a prison than a place of justice. Ethan attended via wheelchair, Daniel pushing him through the metal detectors and into the courtroom. Savannah was already there, seated at the plaintiff's table with Victoria Cross. She wore a conservative navy dress and minimal makeup, the picture of a concerned wife. When she saw Ethan, she offered a small, sad smile that made his skin crawl. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Honor Patricia Keene, with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression. She took her seat at the bench and reviewed the case file briefly before looking up. This is a hearing to determine whether Ethan Calloway requires a conservatorship due to diminished mental capacity, Judge Keene said. Ms. Cross, you may proceed. Victoria Cross stood, and Ethan immediately understood why she had the reputation she did. She was tall, elegant, and spoke with the kind of confidence that made everything she said sound like objective truth. Your Honor, this case is about a man who has suffered tremendous trauma and is no longer capable of making sound decisions about his care or his finances. Ethan Calloway was once a successful businessman, but the accident that left him paralyzed has also left him vulnerable and easily influenced. She went on for several minutes, painting a picture of Ethan as a broken man clinging to anyone who showed him kindness. She talked about his obsessive focus on the case against his brother, his erratic behavior in refusing to sign documents Bradley had prepared, and his inappropriate relationship with his caregiver. When she finished, she called her first witness, a psychiatrist named Dr. Raymond Moss, who'd been hired by Savannah to evaluate Ethan's mental state. Dr. Moss testified that based on his review of Ethan's medical records and interviews with people close to him, Ethan was suffering from severe depression and post-traumatic stress that impaired his judgment. In your professional opinion, Victoria asked, is Mr. Calloway capable of managing his own affairs? I have concerns, Dr. Moss said carefully. The trauma he's experienced, combined with the isolation and dependency that often accompanies severe physical injury, creates a situation where his decision-making capacity is compromised. Daniel cross-examined aggressively, pointing out that Dr. Moss had never actually met Ethan in person, and that his evaluation was based entirely on secondhand information. But the damage was done. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Savannah took the stand next, and Ethan had to give her credit. She was a hell of an actress. She spoke in a soft, trembling voice about how worried she was, how she'd tried to support Ethan, but he'd pushed her away, how she was only seeking conservatorship because she loved him and wanted to protect him. I know he's angry with me, Savannah said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. And I understand that. I made mistakes, but I can't stand by and watch him destroy himself because he's too proud to accept help. Victoria walked her through a series of questions designed to make Ethan look unstable. She asked about the confrontation in the hospital room, spinning Ethan's anger into evidence of volatility. She asked about his relationship with Claire, suggesting that Ethan had become dependent on her in an unhealthy way. Mrs. Calloway, Victoria said, in your opinion, is your husband capable of making rational decisions about his care? No, Savannah said, her voice breaking. I don't think he is. And it breaks my heart. When it was Daniel's turn, he came out swinging. He asked Savannah about the timing of the divorce filing, about her disappearance after the accident, about the fact that she'd had no contact with Ethan for months before suddenly reappearing. Mrs. Calloway, isn't it true that you filed for divorce the moment your husband was at his most vulnerable? I was scared. Isn't it also true that you emptied your joint accounts and moved the funds into your personal account before filing? Savannah's composure slipped. That was my money. Was it? Or was it marital property that you took without your husband's consent? Objection, Victoria said. Relevance. Your Honor, this goes to Mrs. Calloway's credibility and her true motivations for seeking conservatorship, Daniel argued. Judge Keene considered. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mrs. Calloway. Savannah's jaw tightened. I took what was mine. And how much was that? I don't remember the exact amount. Daniel pulled out a bank statement and handed it to the judge. According to this, you withdrew $350,000 from joint accounts 2 days before filing for divorce. Does that refresh your memory? Savannah's face flushed. I was entitled to that money. But you didn't tell your husband you were taking it, did you? He was in the hospital. Exactly. He was helpless, and you took advantage of that. Daniel's voice was cold. And now you're here claiming you want to protect him. But what you really want is control over his remaining assets. That's not true. Then why file for conservatorship now? Why not 3 months ago when he was first injured? Why wait until after he successfully removed his brother from the company and regained some semblance of stability? Savannah didn't have an answer. She just sat there, her mask finally cracking, and for the first time since the hearing started, Ethan saw a flicker of doubt cross Judge Keene's face. Daniel called Dr. Patel next, and she testified that while Ethan had certainly experienced trauma, there was no evidence of cognitive impairment or diminished mental capacity. She described his progress in therapy, his active participation in decisions about his care, and his clear understanding of his medical situation. In your professional opinion, Daniel asked, is Mr. Calloway capable of making his own decisions? Absolutely, Dr. Patel said without hesitation. Then it was Claire's turn. She took the stand looking calm and professional, but Ethan could see the tension in her shoulders. Victoria Cross approached her like a predator circling prey. Ms. Whitaker, how long have you been Mr. Calloway's caregiver? About 2 months? And in that time, would you say you've developed a close relationship with him? I'd say we've developed a professional working relationship, yes. Just professional? Victoria's tone was skeptical. You spend how many hours a day with Mr. Calloway? 8 to 10, depending on his needs. That's a lot of time. Surely you've become more than just his caregiver. Claire's eyes hardened. I'm his caregiver. That's my job. But you've been seen entering his hospital room outside of your scheduled shifts. You've had private conversations with him, closed-door meetings. Doesn't that suggest something more personal? It suggests that I care about my patient's well-being, which is exactly what I'm supposed to do. Victoria smiled thinly. Ms. Whitaker, isn't it true that you suffered a similar injury years ago and that you've made a career out of working with vulnerable patients? I don't see how my personal history is relevant. I think it's very relevant. I think you see yourself in Mr. Calloway, and that's clouded your professional judgment. I think you've formed an emotional attachment that's inappropriate given the power dynamic inherent in your relationship. That's ridiculous, Claire said, her voice sharp. Is it? Or have you been encouraging Mr. Calloway to push away his family, to reject help from people who actually care about him because it benefits you to keep him isolated? Objection! Daniel was on his feet. Counsel is testifying instead of asking questions. Sustained, Judge Keene said. Ms. Cross, stick to questions. But the damage was done. Victoria had planted the idea that Claire was somehow manipulating Ethan, and now it was out there, poisoning the air. When it was Daniel's turn, he asked Claire to describe her professional credentials, her experience, and the standards of care she followed. She answered calmly, methodically, making it clear that everything she'd done was within proper boundaries. Ms. Whitaker, Daniel said, has Mr. Calloway ever expressed to you any confusion about his situation or an inability to make decisions? No, he's always been clear about what he wants and why. And in your professional opinion, based on your daily interactions with him, is he capable of managing his own affairs? Yes, absolutely. Finally, it was Ethan's turn. Daniel had debated whether to put him on the stand, worried that it might backfire, but Ethan had insisted. He needed to speak for himself. Claire wheeled him to the witness box, and the bailiff swore him in. Ethan placed his hand on the Bible. Despite his lack of faith, he knew the symbolism mattered, and promised to tell the truth. Victoria Cross stood and approached slowly, like she had all the time in the world. Mr. Calloway, you've been through a terrible ordeal. No one disputes that. But I have to ask, do you really believe you're in a position to make major decisions about your life right now? Yes, Ethan said firmly. Even though you can't walk? Even though you're dependent on others for basic care? My legs don't work, my brain does. But surely the trauma has affected you emotionally. You've lost your mobility. Your wife is seeking a divorce. Your brother betrayed you. That's a lot for anyone to handle. It is, but it doesn't make me incompetent. Victoria pulled out a document. Mr. Calloway, this is a psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Moss. He concludes that you're suffering from depression and post-traumatic stress. Do you dispute that? I dispute that it makes me incapable of managing my life. But depression affects judgment, doesn't it? I'm not depressed. I'm angry. There's a difference. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You're angry? Yes. At my brother for stealing from me. At my wife for abandoning me. At people like you who think that because I can't walk, I must be helpless. Ethan's voice grew stronger. I'm angry, and I'm using that anger to rebuild my life. That doesn't make me crazy. It makes me human. Victoria changed tactics. Let's talk about Claire Whitaker. You've become quite close to her, haven't you? She's my caregiver. Is that all she is? Ethan met her eyes. Yes. You don't have feelings for her? I respect her. I trust her. But this isn't some soap opera where the patient falls in love with the nurse. She's helping me recover, and that's it. And yet you spend hours alone with her every day. You confide in her. You rely on her. Doesn't that concern you? No. Because unlike my wife, Claire actually showed up when I needed help. The courtroom went silent. Victoria looked momentarily thrown, but she recovered quickly. Mr. Calloway, your wife is here today because she cares about you. My wife is here today because she wants my money. Ethan said bluntly. She left me when I had nothing to offer her. Now that I'm fighting back, she's suddenly concerned? That's not love. That's opportunism. Judge Keene leaned forward. Mr. Calloway, I understand you're upset, but let's keep this civil. I apologize, Your Honor, but I need you to understand something. I'm not perfect. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and some days I don't want to get out of bed. But I'm fully aware of my situation. I'm making my own decisions, and I don't need anyone controlling my life. He looked directly at Savannah, especially not someone who abandoned me the moment things got hard. Savannah's face went pale. Daniel stood for his cross-examination. Ethan, walk me through a typical day. What decisions do you make? I decide when to eat, what therapy exercises to do, how much pain medication to take. I review financial documents for the company. I meet with my lawyer to discuss the investigation into my brother. I make decisions about my medical care in consultation with Dr. Patel. He paused. I'm living my life. It's harder than it used to be, but I'm doing it. And Claire helps with that? She helps with the physical stuff I can't do anymore, but the decisions are mine. Thank you. No further questions. Judge Keene called a recess, and Ethan was wheeled out into the hallway. Claire followed along with Daniel, and the three of them found a quiet corner away from the crowd. You did good in there, Daniel said. Didn't feel like it. You told the truth. That's what matters. He checked his watch. Judge Keene will probably issue a ruling within the next hour. We just have to wait. Waiting was torture. Ethan sat in that hallway, watching lawyers and families move past, and felt like his entire future was balanced on the edge of a knife. If Judge Keene ruled in Savannah's favor, everything was over. He'd become a legal child, unable to control his own money, his own medical care, his own life. Savannah would have the power to make every decision for him, and there wouldn't be a damn thing he could do about it. Claire sat beside him, not saying anything, just being there. At some point, she reached over and squeezed his hand briefly before pulling away. It was a small gesture, but it steadied him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bailiff called them back into the courtroom. Judge Keene took her seat and looked out at the assembled crowd. Her expression was unreadable. I've reviewed the testimony and evidence presented today, she said. This is a difficult case because it involves a man who has undeniably suffered significant trauma and life-altering injuries. The question before me is not whether Mr. Calloway has been through hardship. Clearly he has. The question is whether that hardship has rendered him incapable of managing his own affairs. She paused, and Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. Mrs. Calloway has presented evidence suggesting that her husband is vulnerable and potentially unable to make sound decisions. However, I find that evidence unconvincing. Mr. Calloway has demonstrated, both in his testimony and in his actions over the past several months, that he retains full cognitive function and decision-making capacity. His anger, while perhaps uncomfortable for some, is a reasonable response to betrayal and abandonment. It does not constitute mental incompetence. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. Furthermore, Judge Keene continued, I find Mrs. Calloway's motives for seeking this conservatorship to be suspect. The timing of her filing, combined with her financial actions during the divorce proceedings, suggests that her primary concern is not Mr. Calloway's well-being, but rather control over his assets. I will not grant a conservatorship based on such dubious grounds. Savannah's face went white. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Mr. Calloway retains full legal authority over his person and his estate. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, and it was over. Ethan sat there, unable to move, unable to process what had just happened. He'd won. After everything, he'd actually won. Daniel was grinning. We did it. Claire's hand found Ethan's shoulder, and when he looked up at her, he saw relief in her eyes. Told you she wouldn't win. Across the courtroom, Savannah stood abruptly and stormed out, Victoria Cross following behind her. Ethan watched them go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication, just exhaustion. Let's get you out of here, Claire said. They left through a side exit to avoid the reporters who'd gathered outside. Daniel drove them back to the hospital in his car, and the whole way. Ethan stared out the window, watching the city pass by. When they got back to his room, Claire helped him into bed, and for the first time in months, Ethan felt like he could actually breathe. Thank you, he said. For what? For believing me, even when I didn't believe myself. Claire smiled. That's what I'm here for. She left to finish her rounds, and Ethan lay there in the quiet, letting the reality of what had just happened sink in. He'd beaten Savannah. He'd beaten Bradley. He'd clawed his way back from the edge of oblivion and proven that he was still capable of fighting for himself. But the victory felt hollow, because at the end of the day, he was still stuck in this bed, still unable to walk, still broken in ways that no court ruling could fix. His phone buzzed, a text from Monica. Saw the news. Congratulations, you deserve that win. Then another one, from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this isn't over. You'll regret this. Ethan stared at the message, his stomach tightening. He knew who it was from. Savannah wasn't done yet, and neither, probably, was Bradley. The fight wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. Ethan deleted the threatening text without responding, but it sat in the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't dig out. Savannah had lost in court, but people like her didn't just accept defeat and walk away. They regrouped. They found new angles, and judging by the venom in that message, she was already planning her next move. The days following the hearing brought a strange kind of calm. The press coverage died down after Judge Keene's ruling made it clear there was no story worth chasing. Callaway Logistics continued operating under Monica's interim leadership, and the investigation into Bradley's embezzlement moved forward with the kind of bureaucratic slowness that made Ethan want to scream. But at least things were moving. Claire maintained her professional distance in a way that felt deliberate now, always making sure there were witnesses around, always keeping conversations brief and clinical. Ethan understood why. They'd both been burned by Savannah's accusations, but it left him feeling more isolated than before. The one person who'd actually given a damn about his recovery was now treating him like any other patient, and he hated it. You're doing that thing again, Claire said one morning during physical therapy. Ethan was in the middle of a resistance exercise, pulling against elastic bands attached to the parallel bars. What thing? That thing where you look like you want to punch something, but you're too polite to actually do it. I'm fine. You've said I'm fine about 6 times this week, and every time you sound less convincing. Ethan released the bands and let them snap back. I'm just tired of being here, tired of this room, tired of the same routine every day. Then let's change it. Dr. Patel signed off on outpatient therapy yesterday. You're cleared for discharge. Ethan went still. What? You heard me? You can go home. Well, not home, since your apartment isn't wheelchair accessible, but there are facilities that specialize in transitional care. Places where you can keep doing therapy while living somewhere that's not a hospital. Why didn't anyone tell me this earlier? Claire shrugged. I'm telling you now. The idea of leaving the hospital should have felt like freedom, but instead it filled Ethan with a kind of dread he couldn't quite name. This room had become his entire world for the past 3 months. The thought of stepping outside those walls, of facing the real world again, felt overwhelming. What if I'm not ready? He asked quietly. Claire sat down on the mat beside him. You're as ready as you're going to be. Staying here longer won't make it easier. It'll just make you more comfortable with being stuck. Is that what happened to you after your accident? Yeah, I spent way too long in rehab because I was terrified of what came next. Leaving meant admitting that my old life was really gone, and I wasn't ready to face that. She looked at him. But eventually I had to, and so do you. Ethan knew she was right. He'd been using the hospital as a shield, a place where his limitations were expected and understood. Out there, he'd have to navigate a world that wasn't built for someone in a wheelchair, deal with people who'd stare or pity him or treat him like he was somehow less than human. But staying here wouldn't change any of that. It would just delay the inevitable. Okay, he said. Let's do it. Daniel helped arrange the logistics. There was a rehabilitation center about 20 minutes from downtown that had private rooms and round-the-clock care. It wasn't cheap, but Ethan's insurance covered most of it, and what it didn't, he could afford. The facility specialized in spinal injuries and had a reputation for aggressive therapy programs that actually got results. Claire came with him on the day of the transfer, riding in the medical transport van and helping him get settled in his new room. It was larger than the hospital room had been, with big windows that looked out over a courtyard and enough space for a proper desk and seating area. There was even a small kitchenette, which meant Ethan could prepare basic meals if he wanted to. This is nice, Claire said, setting down his bag. Way better than that closet you were in before. Ethan looked around, trying to feel something other than anxiety. Yeah, it's good. You don't sound convinced. I'm just adjusting. Claire walked over to the window and looked out at the courtyard. You know, when I first moved into my place after rehab, I spent the entire first night crying. Just sat there in my new apartment, surrounded by all my stuff, and completely fell apart. What changed? Nothing, really. I just woke up the next morning and realized I had to keep going anyway. Some days that's all you can do. Just keep going until it starts to feel less terrible. She turned to face him, and there was something different in her expression, less guarded, more real. Listen, she said, I know I've been keeping my distance since the hearing, and I know that's probably made things harder for you, but I need you to understand something. When Savannah tried to paint me as someone who was taking advantage of you, it scared the hell out of me. Not because I thought she was right, but because I realized how easily people could twist this into something it's not. Claire, let me finish. She took a breath. I care about you, Ethan, more than I probably should for someone who's supposed to be your caregiver. And that scares me too, because I know how these things can go wrong. I've seen patients develop feelings for their caregivers, and I've seen caregivers take advantage of that. I never wanted to be that person. Ethan felt his chest tighten. You're not. How do you know? Because I know the difference between someone who cares and someone who's using me. Savannah used me. You've just been here. Claire smiled, but it was sad around the edges. I'm not going to be your primary caregiver anymore. The facility has its own staff, and it's better if we keep things separate. But I'll still be around. I'm consulting on your case, and I want to see you through this. So what does that make us? I don't know. Friends? Maybe, if you want that. Ethan did want that. More than that, actually. But he wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not when everything was still so fragile. Friend sounds good, he said. The next few weeks were brutal. The facility's therapy program was exactly as advertised, aggressive to the point of cruelty. Ethan spent 6 hours a day in various forms of physical therapy, working muscles that had atrophied, trying to coax sensation back into legs that mostly refused to cooperate. Some days he made progress. Most days he didn't. But he kept showing up because the alternative was giving up, and he'd already decided that wasn't an option. The other residents were a mixed group. There was Marcus, a former construction worker who'd fallen 3 stories and shattered his pelvis. He spent most of his time cracking dark jokes about his situation and flirting shamelessly with the nursing staff. Then there was Diane, a retired teacher who'd had a stroke that left her partially paralyzed on her right side. She was quiet, determined, and had a habit of offering unsolicited advice about everything from therapy techniques to what to order from the cafeteria. You're new, Marcus said one afternoon, wheeling up beside Ethan in the common area. Still got that deer in headlights look. That obvious? Oh yeah, give it a few weeks. You'll either get used to it or you'll lose your mind. Most people do a little of both. Diane rolled her eyes from across the room. Don't listen to him. He's been here 4 months and still hasn't learned how to have a normal conversation. I'm plenty normal, Marcus protested. I just don't sugarcoat things. There's a difference between honesty and being an ass, Diane said. Ethan found himself smiling despite everything. There was something comforting about being around people who understood what he was going through, who didn't treat his injury like something shameful or tragic. They were all just trying to survive, and there was a weird kind of solidarity in that. But the progress remained agonizingly slow. Ethan could feel sensation in parts of his legs now, a pins and needles feeling that was more annoying than hopeful, but actual movement was still mostly impossible. His therapist, a woman named Karen, who made Claire look soft by comparison, kept pushing him harder. I need you to try to flex your left quad, Karen said during one session, her hand on his thigh. Ethan concentrated, willing the muscle to respond. Nothing happened. Again. He tried again. Still nothing. You're not focusing. Clear your mind and try. I am trying, Ethan said through gritted teeth. Not hard enough. Frustration boiled over. What do you want from me? I can't just make my legs work because you tell me to. Karen didn't flinch. No, but you can stop feeling sorry for yourself and actually put in the effort. I've seen your scans. The damage is bad, but it's not total. You've got nerve pathways that are intact. They're just not firing yet. And they won't fire if you keep half-assing these exercises. I'm not half-assing anything. Then prove it. Flex the quad. Ethan closed his eyes and focused every ounce of energy he had on that single muscle. He imagined it contracting, pictured the neurons firing, visualized the movement even though he couldn't feel it. And then, impossibly, something twitched. Karen's hand pressed down harder. Again, do it again. Ethan tried, and this time the twitch was stronger. Not much, barely noticeable, but it was there. Good, Karen said. That's good. Now we build on that. By the time the session ended, Ethan was drenched in sweat and shaking from exhaustion. But he'd felt something. After months of nothing, he'd felt his leg respond, and that tiny victory felt massive. He told Claire about it that evening when she stopped by. She'd been coming a few times a week, always in the evening after her shifts, always casual, like it was no big deal. But Ethan looked forward to those visits more than he wanted to admit. That's huge, Claire said when he described the twitch. Karen's tough, but she knows what she's doing. If she thinks you've got functional pathways, you probably do. Does that mean I'll walk again? It means you might regain some movement. Walking is a long way off, if it happens at all. But any progress is good progress. Ethan nodded, trying not to let hope run away with him. He'd learned the hard way that hope could be just as dangerous as despair. Better to focus on the small wins and not think too far ahead. How's the company? Claire asked, changing the subject. Monica's doing great. Better than I did, honestly. She's already closed 2 deals I'd been struggling with. Ethan smiled. Turns out I wasn't as indispensable as I thought. You built something good. That doesn't go away just because you're not in the office every day. Bradley's trial date got set 3 months from now. You planning to testify? Daniel wants me to. Says it'll be more impactful coming from me. Ethan rubbed his eyes. I don't know if I can sit in a courtroom and watch my brother get torn apart, even if he deserves it. You don't have to decide now. What would you do? Claire thought about it. I'd testify. Not for revenge, but because the truth matters. Your brother stole from you and from everyone who trusted him. People need to know that. Even if it destroys what's left of my family? Your brother already did that when he started stealing. You're just holding him accountable. Ethan knew she was right, but it didn't make the decision any easier. His parents had reached out once since the scandal broke, a brief phone call where they'd expressed disappointment in Bradley but also made it clear they thought Ethan was being too harsh. Family was family, they'd said, as if blood relation somehow excused embezzlement. Ethan had hung up on them and hadn't answered their calls since. The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that. Claire told him about a patient she'd picked up who reminded her of Ethan when they'd first met. Stubborn, angry, and determined to make everyone around him as miserable as he was. Ethan laughed at the comparison, though he knew it was accurate. You made it sound like I was the worst patient you'd ever had, he said. You were definitely in the top 5. Only top 5? I had a guy once who threw his bedpan at me because I suggested he try sitting up for meals. You never did that, so you get points for restraint. They talked until visiting hours ended, and when Claire left, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, contentment. Not happiness, exactly. His life was still a mess, and the future was still terrifyingly uncertain. But in that moment, sitting in his room with the memory of Claire's laugh still hanging in the air, he felt like maybe things could be okay. 2 days later, that fragile peace shattered. Ethan was in the common area, half watching television and half listening to Marcus tell an elaborate story about a fishing trip that had gone catastrophically wrong when one of the facility staff approached him. Mr. Calloway, there's someone here to see you. I'm not expecting anyone. She says she's your wife. Ethan's stomach dropped. Tell her to leave. She's insisting. She says it's urgent. Marcus picked up on Ethan's mood immediately. Want me to tell her to get lost? I'm good at that. No, I'll handle it. Ethan wheeled toward the entrance, his mind racing. What the hell was Savannah doing here? She was waiting in the lobby, dressed in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking completely out of place among the institutional furniture and medical equipment. When she saw Ethan, her face shifted into an expression of concern that made his skin crawl. Ethan, she said softly. Thank you for seeing me. I didn't have a choice. What do you want? Can we talk? Somewhere private? No. Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. Savannah glanced around at the other visitors and staff members, then sighed. Fine. I came to apologize. Ethan stared at her. You're kidding. I'm not. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hearing, and I realize I handled everything badly. The way I left, the things I said in court, I was wrong. And I'm sorry. You're sorry? Yes. You filed for conservatorship to take control of my life, dragged Claire through the mud, and tried to paint me as mentally incompetent. And now you're sorry. I know how it looks. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you lost in court, and now you're trying a different angle. Savannah's mask slipped slightly. I'm trying to make things right. By showing up here uninvited? By ambushing me in a rehab facility? I thought if I could just talk to you face to face, you'd understand that I'm not the monster you think I am. Her voice wavered. I made mistakes, Ethan. I was scared and I ran, and I'm sorry. But I still care about you. I still want to help. You want to help? Ethan's voice was flat. Then sign the divorce papers and leave me alone. I haven't signed them yet because I don't think divorce is what either of us really wants. I want it. I've wanted it since the day you walked out of that hospital room and didn't come back. We could try again, start over. I could move back in, help you adjust. Move back in where? We don't have a home anymore. You emptied the apartment, remember? Took everything and disappeared. Savannah flinched. I can fix that. We can find a new place, something accessible. Stop. Ethan held up a hand. Just stop. I don't know what game you're playing, but I'm done. You lost the conservatorship case. You're not getting my money, and you're sure as hell not getting me back. This isn't about money. Everything with you is about money. It always has been. Savannah's composure finally cracked. Her eyes went hard, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. You think you've won, but you haven't. You're stuck in a wheelchair, Ethan. Your company's being run by someone else. Your brother's going to prison. And eventually, people will forget about you. You'll just be another sad story. Another guy who had everything and lost it all. Get out. You're going to regret this. When you're alone and broken and there's nobody left who cares, you're going to wish you'd taken me back. But it'll be too late. I said get out. One of the security guards had noticed the commotion and started walking over. Savannah saw him coming and smoothed her expression back into something neutral. Think about what I said, Ethan. The offer won't last forever. Then she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Ethan sat there in the lobby, his hands clenched on the armrests of the wheelchair, fighting to keep his breathing steady. Marcus wheeled up beside him. That was your wife? Ex-wife, almost. Man, what did you ever see in her? I have no idea anymore. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He kept replaying Savannah's visit, her words echoing in his head. The worst part was that some of what she'd said was true. He was stuck in a wheelchair. His company was being run by someone else. And as much as he hated to admit it, there were days when he felt exactly like she'd described, broken and forgotten. His phone rang just after midnight. It was Daniel. Sorry to call so late, but I thought you'd want to know. Bradley just took a plea deal. Ethan sat up. What kind of deal? 5 years minimum, full restitution, and a permanent ban from serving as an officer or director of any company. The DA didn't want to risk a trial, and Bradley's lawyer convinced him it was the best option. So no trial? No trial. It's over. Ethan should have felt relieved, but all he felt was empty. His brother was going to prison, and there was no satisfaction in it, just a dull ache where family used to be. Ethan, you still there? Yeah, thanks for letting me know. After Daniel hung up, Ethan sat in the dark, staring at nothing. Everything he'd fought for over the past few months, the company, his autonomy, justice for Bradley's betrayal, felt hollow now that he'd actually achieved it. He'd won, but winning hadn't fixed anything. He was still broken, still alone. A knock on the door pulled him out of his spiral. Yeah? Claire opened the door and stepped inside. She was in street clothes, not her scrubs, which meant she wasn't on shift. I heard Savannah showed up today. News travels fast. Small facility. People talk. She closed the door behind her. You okay? I don't know. No. Maybe. Ethan rubbed his face. She said I'm going to end up alone. And she's probably right. Claire walked over and sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that Ethan could have reached out and touched her if he'd wanted to. She's not right. She's just trying to get in your head because that's the only power she has left.
Well, what if she is, though? What if this is as good as it gets? A rehab facility and a wheelchair and a company I can't even run anymore. Then you build something new, something better. Claire looked at him with an intensity that made Ethan's chest tighten. You're not the same person you were before the accident, and yeah, that's hard. But it doesn't mean your life is over. It just means you have to figure out what comes next.
What if I don't know what comes next? Then you figure it out one day at a time, with people who actually give a damn about you. She reached out and took his hand. I'm not going anywhere, Ethan. I know I said I couldn't be your caregiver anymore, and that's still true. But I'm here, as your friend, as whatever you need me to be. Ethan looked down at their joined hands. He'd been so focused on what he'd lost that he hadn't stopped to appreciate what he'd found. Claire had walked into his life at his absolute lowest point and refused to let him disappear. She'd fought for him when no one else would, and somewhere along the way she'd become the one person he trusted more than anyone. I need you to be honest with me, he said quietly. Is this just you being a good person, or is there something more here? Claire didn't let go of his hand. There's something more. I didn't want there to be because it complicates everything. But yeah, there's something more. What do we do about that? I don't know. We take it slow. We don't rush into anything. We see where it goes. She smiled. And we definitely don't tell Savannah because she'll use it as ammunition in the divorce. Ethan laughed despite himself. Deal. They sat there in the quiet for a long time, not talking, just being together. And for the first time since the accident, Ethan felt like the future might actually hold something worth fighting for. When Claire finally left, promising to come back tomorrow, Ethan lay down and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring more therapy, more pain, more slow and frustrating progress. But it would also bring Claire. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks that followed felt different. Not easier, exactly, but more purposeful. Ethan threw himself into therapy with a determination that surprised even Karen, who'd seen plenty of patients flame out after initial bursts of motivation. But this wasn't just about proving doctors wrong anymore or fighting back against people who'd betrayed him. This was about building something new, and that required a different kind of strength. The twitches in his left leg became more consistent. Still small, still frustrating, but present. Karen worked him through exercises designed to strengthen the neural pathways. Repetitive movements that made Ethan want to scream from boredom, but that slowly, incrementally, started producing results. His right leg remained stubbornly unresponsive, but even that didn't feel like total defeat anymore. Progress was progress, even when it was uneven. Claire kept coming by most evenings, and they'd fallen into an easy rhythm. Sometimes they talked about nothing, television shows, books, stupid jokes Marcus had told in the common area. Other times they talked about everything, what Ethan wanted to do with his life now that running Callaway Logistics full-time wasn't realistic, what Claire's long-term plans were, whether either of them had actually processed the trauma of the past few months, or if they were just running on adrenaline and spite. Probably the second one, Claire said one night, sitting cross-legged on Ethan's bed while he worked through some paperwork Monica had sent over. Most people don't deal with trauma until it's over, and yours isn't really over yet. When does it end? I don't think it ends. I think you just get used to carrying it. She tilted her head. That sounds depressing. What I mean is, eventually the weight gets easier to manage. You build up strength around it. How long did it take you? To stop feeling broken? A couple years, maybe. To actually be okay? I'm still working on that. Ethan set down the papers and looked at her. You seem okay. I've gotten good at faking it. She smiled, but there was something real underneath it. That's the thing nobody tells you about recovery. It's not linear. Some days you feel strong, and some days you wake up and can't remember why you're bothering. You just have to ride it out. What do you do on the bad days? Depends. Sometimes I call a friend, sometimes I go for a walk, sometimes I just let myself feel like garbage for a few hours and then move on. She shrugged. There's no magic formula. You just have to find what works for you. Ethan nodded slowly. He was starting to understand that recovery wasn't about returning to who he used to be. That person was gone, and trying to resurrect him was pointless. The challenge was figuring out who he was now and whether that person was worth being. The divorce papers finally arrived, signed by Savannah's lawyer and ready for Ethan's signature. Daniel brought them by the facility personally, along with a bottle of decent whiskey he claimed was for celebrating, but that Ethan suspected was really just moral support. "Once you sign these, it's done," Daniel said, setting the papers on Ethan's desk. "No more legal ties to her. You're free." Ethan stared at the documents. His marriage had been over the moment Savannah walked out of that hospital room, but signing these papers would make it official. Final. There was something both liberating and terrifying about that. "She contest anything?" Ethan asked. "Nope." After the conservatorship hearing fell apart, her lawyer advised her to take the settlement and move on. She gets $100,000 as a lump sum, and that's it. No alimony, no stake in the company, nothing else. She agreed to that? She didn't have much choice. Judge Keene made it pretty clear she wasn't going to be sympathetic to Savannah's claims, and dragging it out would have cost her more in legal fees than she'd get in settlement. Daniel poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "She's getting off easy, honestly. If you wanted to, you could probably sue her for the money she took from the joint accounts. I just want her gone. Then sign the papers." Ethan picked up this pen and flipped through the document until he found the signature line. He paused there, the pen hovering over the page. For a moment, he thought about the early days of his marriage, back when he'd actually believed Savannah loved him. They'd met at a charity gala, and she'd been magnetic, beautiful, charming, ambitious in a way that matched his own drive. They'd gotten married fast, too fast probably, caught up in the momentum of building successful lives together. But looking back now, Ethan couldn't pinpoint a single moment when Savannah had actually chosen him over her own comfort. Every decision she'd made had been calculated to benefit her, and the moment he stopped being useful, she discarded him without hesitation. That wasn't love. That wasn't even close. He signed the papers. "There," he said, setting down the pen. "Done." Daniel raised his glass. "To freedom from people who don't deserve you." They drank, and Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was relief. One more fight was over. One more weight was gone. "What's next for you?" Daniel asked. "You planning to come back to the company?" "I don't know. Monica's doing great, and honestly, I'm not sure I want that life anymore." "What do you want?" Ethan had been thinking about that question a lot lately. Before the accident, he'd defined himself entirely by his work. Callaway Logistics had been his identity, his purpose, the thing that proved he was worth something. But now, sitting in a wheelchair in a rehab facility, he couldn't summon the same passion for boardrooms and contract negotiations. That world felt small and hollow compared to what he'd been through. "I want to help people," Ethan said. "People like me. People who've been told their lives are over because of an injury or a disability. I want to build something that actually matters." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Like what? A foundation?" "Maybe. Or a rehab center. Something that focuses on more than just physical recovery. Something that addresses the mental and emotional part of it too." Ethan gestured around the room. "This place is good, but it's expensive. Most people can't afford it. I want to create something accessible." "That's ambitious." "So was starting Callaway Logistics, and I managed that." "Fair point." Daniel finished his whiskey. "You'd need funding, a team, probably some partnerships with hospitals and insurance companies. It's doable, but it'll take time." "I've got nothing but time." They talked through the logistics for another hour, Daniel taking notes and asking questions, helping Ethan shape the vague idea into something more concrete. By the time Daniel left, Ethan had the beginnings of a plan. It wasn't much yet, but it was something, a direction, a purpose. He told Claire about it that night, and her face lit up in a way he hadn't seen before. "That's perfect," she said. "You'd be amazing at that." "You think so?" "I know so. You understand what it's like to be where these people are. You've lived it. That's worth more than any degree or credential. Would you want to be involved? If this actually happens?" Claire hesitated. "In what capacity?" "I don't know. Partner, maybe? You've got the medical background and the experience. We could build it together." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable in her eyes. "Let me think about it." Ethan felt a flicker of disappointment but pushed it aside. Of course, no pressure. But over the next few days, Claire seemed distant. Not cold exactly, but distracted. She still came by most evenings, but the conversations felt more surface level, like she was keeping part of herself locked away. Ethan tried not to let it bother him, tried to give her space, but the uncertainty gnawed at him. Finally, about a week after he'd proposed the partnership, Claire showed up with 2 coffees and a determined expression. "We need to talk," she said. Ethan's stomach dropped. In his experience, conversations that started with those words never went well. "Okay." Claire sat down and took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about your offer, the rehab center, the partnership, all of it. And I want to say yes, but I need you to understand something first." "What?" "If we do this, we need to figure out what we are to each other. Because right now, we're in this weird space where we're more than friends, but we haven't defined anything. And that's going to be a problem if we're trying to build a business together." Ethan's heart was racing. "What do you want us to be?" "I want to be with you," Claire said simply. "Not as your caregiver, not as your therapist, but as your partner. In every sense of the word. But I need to know if that's what you want too, or if this is just proximity and trauma bonding." "It's not trauma bonding." "How do you know?" "Because I've spent the last 4 months watching you show up for me when you didn't have to. I've seen you push me when I needed pushing and sit with me when I needed someone to just be there. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my caregiver and started seeing you as the person I want to build a life with." Ethan met her eyes. "This isn't just gratitude or dependence or whatever label you want to put on it. I care about you, Claire. A lot." Claire's expression softened. "I care about you too, but this is complicated. Your divorce isn't even finalized yet. You're still in rehab. We're talking about starting a business together. There are a million ways this could blow up in our faces. So we take it slow. We figure it out as we go. But I don't want to keep pretending this is just friendship when it's clearly not." "Neither do I." They looked at each other across the small room, and Ethan felt the tension that had been building for weeks finally break. Claire stood up, crossed the space between them, and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, like she was testing whether this was real or if they were both just caught up in the moment. But then Ethan reached up and pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that felt inevitable, like they'd been heading toward this from the moment she'd walked into his hospital room and refused to let him quit. When they finally broke apart, Claire was smiling. "Okay, we're doing this. The rehab center or the relationship?" "Both. Assuming we don't kill each other in the process. I'll try not to be too difficult." "Liar," Claire said, but she was laughing. The next few months were a blur of planning and paperwork and slow, grinding progress. Ethan worked with Daniel to set up a nonprofit organization that would eventually become the rehab center. They secured initial funding through a combination of Ethan's own money and donations from former business contacts who were impressed by the vision. Monica agreed to serve on the board, along with Dr. Patel and a few other medical professionals Claire recruited. Finding a location took longer than expected. They needed somewhere accessible, with enough space for therapy rooms, private quarters, and common areas, but that didn't cost a fortune. After looking at a dozen properties that were either too small or too expensive, they found an old community center that had been sitting empty for years. It needed work, a lot of work, but the bones were good, and the price was right. Ethan's progress in therapy continued, incremental and uneven. He could move his left leg now, small movements that didn't amount to much, but that proved the nerves were firing. His right leg remained mostly unresponsive, and Karen had stopped promising that would change. But Ethan had learned to accept the limitations. Maybe he'd walk again someday. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, his life wasn't over. The divorce finalized 3 months after he'd signed the papers. Ethan received a brief email from Daniel confirming that it was done, and that was it. No ceremony, no closure, just a legal document that said his marriage to Savannah had officially ended. He felt nothing when he read the email. Savannah was part of his past now, a painful chapter that was finally closed. Bradley went to prison without Ethan ever seeing him again. The plea deal meant there was no trial, no dramatic courtroom confrontation, just a sentencing hearing that Ethan attended via video call. Bradley looked smaller somehow, diminished in his prison jumpsuit, And when the judge asked if he had anything to say, Bradley just shook his head. Ethan wondered if his brother felt any remorse or if he was just angry at getting caught. He'd probably never know. His parents sent a letter after the sentencing, a stiff and formal thing that expressed disappointment in both their sons and made it clear they considered the whole situation a family embarrassment. Ethan read it once, then threw it away. He'd spent too much time trying to earn approval from people who'd never really seen him, and he was done with that. The rehab center took nearly a year to get off the ground. There were permits to file, inspections to pass, staff to hire, and 1,000 small details that threatened to derail the whole project. But Ethan had learned patience during his recovery, and he applied that same stubborn determination to building something that mattered. Claire worked alongside him through all of it, and their relationship deepened in the quiet moments between meetings and construction delays. They learned how to fight productively, how to balance the professional and personal aspects of their partnership, how to support each other when things got hard. It wasn't always smooth. They had their share of arguments and misunderstandings, but they worked through it because they both wanted this to succeed. Marcus was one of their first patients when the center finally opened. He'd been discharged from the facility months earlier, but had struggled with depression and isolation after going home. When Ethan reached out and offered him a spot in their program, Marcus had been skeptical at first. "You sure you want me?" Marcus had asked over the phone. "I'm kind of a disaster." "We're all disasters," Ethan had replied. "That's the point." The center wasn't fancy. They couldn't afford the kind of high-end equipment the private facility had, and the rooms were small and functional rather than luxurious. But what they offered was something more valuable: a community of people who understood what it meant to rebuild from nothing, and staff who actually gave a damn because they'd been there themselves. Claire ran the day-to-day operations while Ethan focused on fundraising and outreach. It was exhausting work, but it felt right in a way his old life never had. Every patient who came through their doors represented someone who'd been written off by the world, and helping them find their way back felt like redemption. A year after the center opened, Ethan achieved something he'd stopped believing was possible. It happened during a routine therapy session. Nothing special, just him and Karen working through his exercises. She'd been pushing him to put weight on his legs using parallel bars for support, and Ethan had been gritting his teeth through the usual frustration of muscles that barely responded. "Try to shift your weight to your left side," Karen said. Ethan concentrated, focusing on the leg that had shown the most progress. He felt the muscles engage, felt his weight shift, and then, impossibly, his right foot moved. Just an inch dragging across the floor, but it moved. Karen's eyes went wide. "Do that again." Ethan tried. The foot moved again. "Ethan," Karen said quietly, "I think we need to adjust your treatment plan." Over the next 6 months, Ethan worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. The progress was agonizingly slow, but it was real. He graduated from parallel bars to a walker, from a walker to forearm crutches. His gait was uneven and required constant focus, but he was moving under his own power. He'd never run again, probably never walk without assistance, but he was standing. The day he walked into the rehab center without his wheelchair was one of the best days of his life. The staff and patients erupted into applause, and Ethan felt tears streaming down his face even as he laughed at the absurdity of it all. He'd spent so long convinced that walking was impossible, and here he was, wobbling on forearm crutches but upright. Claire met him in the hallway, and she was crying too. "You did it." "We did it," Ethan corrected, because that was the truth. He hadn't done any of this alone. Claire had been there from the beginning, refusing to let him give up even when he'd wanted to. Monica had kept his company afloat and served on the board. Daniel had fought his legal battles. Karen and Dr. Patel had pushed him past what he thought were his limits. Even Marcus and Diane and the other patients had shown him that recovery was possible. The accident had destroyed his old life, but it had also forced him to build something better, something real. He'd lost his marriage, his company, his ability to walk, and for a while his sense of purpose. But he'd gained perspective, resilience, and people who actually gave a damn about him. And maybe that trade-off wasn't so bad after all. On a warm evening in late spring, Ethan and Claire stood in the courtyard of the rehab center, watching the sunset behind the old community center they'd transformed. The center was full now, 15 patients working through their own recoveries, and there was a waiting list of people who needed help. "We should expand," Claire said. "Maybe open a second location." One crisis at a time, Ethan replied, but he was smiling. I'm serious. There are so many people who need this. I know. And we'll get there. But right now I'm just trying to appreciate what we've already built. Claire leaned against him and Ethan wrapped an arm around her shoulders. They stood there in comfortable silence, two broken people who'd found a way to put each other back together. You ever regret it? Claire asked quietly. Giving up Callaway Logistics? Walking away from that life? Ethan thought about it. His old life had been successful by every conventional measure: money, status, power. But it had also been empty. He'd built an empire and lost himself in the process, and it had taken a catastrophic accident to force him to realize that success wasn't the same as meaning. No, he said, I don't regret it. That life wasn't mine. It was something I thought I was supposed to want. This, he gestured at the center, at Claire, at the life they'd built together. This is actually mine. Good answer. They stayed there until the sun disappeared completely and the courtyard lights flickered on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more patients to help, more funding to secure, more battles to fight. But Ethan had learned something important over the past 2 years. He'd learned that strength wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up, even when it seemed impossible. It was about asking for help when you needed it and offering help when others did. It was about building something meaningful from the wreckage of what you'd lost. The car crash had shattered his spine and destroyed his marriage and torn apart his family. But it had also stripped away everything false and left him with something true. And standing there in the courtyard with Claire beside him, Ethan realized he'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life. Not success or validation or proof that he was worth something, but actual peace. 6 months later, Ethan married Claire in the same courtyard where they'd stood watching the sunset. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and staff from the center, nothing fancy or elaborate. Ethan walked down the makeshift aisle on four-arm crutches, his gait uneven but steady, and when he reached Claire, she was crying. You made it, she whispered. Yeah, Ethan said. I did. The officiant kept it brief. And when it came time for vows, Ethan spoke from the heart. I spent most of my life trying to prove I was strong enough, successful enough, worthy enough. And then I lost everything. And I realized that strength isn't about never needing help. It's about accepting help when it's offered and building something real with the people who show up. He looked at Claire. You showed up when nobody else would. You saw something in me worth saving, and you refused to let me give up. I love you for that, for all of it. And I promise to spend the rest of my life showing up for you the same way you showed up for me. Claire's vows were simpler. I love you, Ethan, not the person you were before the accident, and not the person you think you should be. I love the person you are right now, imperfect and stubborn and still figuring things out. We're going to build an incredible life together. I can't wait. They kissed, and the small crowd erupted into applause. Marcus, who'd recovered enough to work as a volunteer at the center, whistled loudly. Diane dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Monica handed Claire a bouquet of flowers she'd been holding, and Dr. Patel congratulated them both. The reception was held in the center's common area, with catered food and a playlist Claire had spent weeks perfecting. At one point, Karen cornered Ethan and demanded a dance, which he managed despite his crutches, the two of them swaying awkwardly to a slow song while everyone watched and laughed. You've come a long way, Karen said. Thanks to you. Thanks to you, mostly. I just pointed you in the right direction. You did the work. Later, when most of the guests had left, Ethan and Claire sat alone in the courtyard again, just like they had so many times before. The center was quiet now, most of the patients asleep, and the night was warm and still. So, Claire said, how does it feel to be married? Pretty much the same as it felt an hour ago, to be honest. She laughed. Fair, but seriously, are you happy? Ethan thought about it. Happiness had always seemed like such an elusive thing, something other people experienced, but that always slipped through his fingers. But sitting there with Claire, looking at the center they'd built and the life they were creating together, he realized he didn't have to chase it anymore. It was right here, in the small moments and the hard-won progress, and the people who'd refused to let him disappear. Yeah, he said, I'm happy. And for the first time in his life, Ethan actually meant it. The years that followed weren't easy. They never are. The center faced funding challenges and staffing issues, and patients who couldn't be helped no matter how hard they tried. Ethan's body continued to present new obstacles: chronic pain, muscle spasms, days when walking was too difficult and he had to use the wheelchair again. Claire dealt with her own struggles, old injuries flaring up and new doubts creeping in about whether they were actually making a difference. But they kept going. They expanded the center to accommodate more patients. They launched a scholarship program for people who couldn't afford treatment. They partnered with hospitals and advocacy groups to push for better accessibility and support systems. And slowly, patient by patient, they helped people rebuild their lives. Ethan never returned to Callaway Logistics in any official capacity. Monica eventually bought him out, and the company continued to thrive under her leadership. Bradley served his 5 years and was released, but Ethan never spoke to him again. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be rebuilt, and Ethan was okay with that. Savannah disappeared from his life completely. He heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd remarried some tech executive in California, and he wished her well in a distant, detached sort of way. Whatever bitterness he'd felt had faded into indifference, which felt like its own kind of closure. The center became Ethan's legacy, the thing he'd be remembered for. Not the company he'd built in his 20s or the fortune he'd accumulated, but the lives he'd helped change. And that felt right. Because in the end, success wasn't measured in money or status or power. It was measured in impact, in the difference you made in other people's lives, in the community you built, and the love you shared. Ethan had been broken by that car crash, shattered in ways that went far beyond his spine. But breaking had forced him to rebuild. And in rebuilding, he discovered who he actually was beneath all the armor and ambition. He was someone who cared, someone who fought, someone who understood that true strength came not from never falling, but from getting back up and helping others do the same. And standing in the courtyard of the rehab center, watching patients work through their therapy and staff members laugh together and Claire directing operations with the same fierce determination she'd once used to drag him out of his hospital bed, Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. This life, messy and difficult and imperfect as it was exactly where he was supposed to be. He'd lost everything and gained something better. He'd been abandoned and found people worth keeping. He'd fallen and learned to stand again. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.